two sisters in Amityville, New York. Sentenced to 6 counts of 25 years to life, DeFeo died in prison on March 12, 2021. The case inspired the book and film versions of the Amityville horror. Around 6:30 p.m. on November 13th, 1974, DeFeo, who was then 23 years old, entered Henry's bar in Amityville, Long Island, New York, and declared, "You got to help me. I think my mother and father are shot." DeFeo and a small group of people went to 112 Ocean Avenue, which was located near the bar, and found that DeFeo's parents were dead inside the home. One of the group, DeFeo's friend Joe Yeswit, made an emergency call to the Amityville Police Department, who searched the house and found that 6 members of the family were dead in their beds. The victims were Ronald Jr.'s parents, Ronald Sr., and Louise, both 43 years of age, and his 4 siblings, Dawn, age 18, Allison, age 13, Mark, age 12, and John, age 9. All of the victims had been shot with a .35 caliber lever-action Marlin 336 rifle around 3 a.m. that morning. The children had been killed by single gunshots, while the parents had each received 2 gunshots. Physical evidence suggests that DeFeo's mother and sister Allison were awake at the time of their deaths. According to Suffolk County Police, all the victims were found lying face down in their beds. The DeFeo family had occupied 112 Ocean Avenue since purchasing the home in 1965. Ronald DeFeo Jr., also known as Butch, was the eldest child of the family and was its lone surviving member. He was taken to the local police station for his own protection after suggesting to police officers at the scene of the crime that the killings had been carried out by a mob hitman named Louis Fellini. However, an interview at the station exposed serious inconsistencies in his version of events. The following day, he confessed to carrying out the killings himself. Fellini, the alleged hitman, had an alibi, proving that he was out of the state at the time of the killings. DeFeo told detectives, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." He admitted that he had taken a bath and redressed, and detailed where he had discarded crucial evidence such as blood-stained clothes, the Marlin rifle, and its cartridges before going to work as usual. DeFeo's trial began on October 14th of 1975. He and his defense lawyer, William Weber, mounted an affirmative defense of insanity, with DeFeo claiming that he had no memory of killing his family. The insanity plea was supported by the psychiatrist for the defense, Daniel Schwartz. The psychiatrist for the prosecution, Dr. Harold Zolan, maintained that although DeFeo was a user of heroin and LSD, what a naughty boy he was, had antisocial personality disorder, and was aware of his actions at the time of the crime. The trial's judge, Thomas Stark, declared that DeFeo's crimes were the most also asserted that he was married at the time of the murders to a woman named Geraldine Gates, with whom he was living in New Jersey, and that his mother phoned to ask him to return to Amityville to break up a fight between Dawn and their father. Subsequently, he drove to Amityville with Geraldine's brother, Richard Raimondo, who was with him at the time of the murders and could verify his entire story, so DeFeo said. In 1990, DeFeo filed a 440 motion, a proceeding to have his conviction vacated. In support of his motion, DeFeo asserted that Dawn and an unknown assailant who fled the house before he could get a good look at him killed their parents, and Dawn subsequently killed their siblings. He said the only person he killed was Dawn, and that it was by accident as they struggled over the rifle. Again, he asserted he was married to Geraldine and that her brother was with him at the time of the murders. An affidavit from Richard Raimondo was submitted to the court, and it was asserted that he could not be located to testify in person. Evidence was submitted to the court by Suffolk County District Attorney's Office suggesting that Richard did not exist and that Geraldine Gates was living in upstate New York, married to someone else at the time of the murders. Geraldine Gates did not testify at this hearing because the authorities had already confronted her about the false claims. In 1992, they had secured a statement under oath in which she admitted that Richard was fictitious and that she did not actually marry Ronald DeFeo until 1989 in anticipation of the filing of the 440 motion. Judge Stark denied the motion, writing, "I find the testimony of the defendant overall to be false and fabricated. His testimony that during the fall of 1974 he was married and lived with his wife and a child at Long Branch, New Jersey, is incredible and not worthy of belief. He produced no corroborating evidence in this regard. Another reason for my disbelief of the defendant's testimony is demonstrated by consideration of several portions of the trial testimony. He signed a lengthy written statement describing in detail his activities. In the statement, he said that he lived with his family at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, and that he worked for his father, that he usually went to and from work with his father, and that he was ill and stayed home from work on the day of the murder. He was also on probation for having stolen an outboard engine, and he had an appointment to see his probation officer in Amityville on that very afternoon. The defendant's girlfriend, Mindy Weiss, testified that she began dating the defendant in June of 1974 and was with him frequently that summer and fall. Stark further declared the defendant's testimony that he did not shoot and kill the members of his family is likewise incredible and not worthy of belief. So was he married? Did he have a girlfriend? He wasn't fucking married. The girlfriend, who the hell knows? On November 30th, 2000, DeFeo met with Rick Osuna, the author of The Night of the DeFeo Murders, or I am so sorry, The Night the DeFeos Died, which was published in 2002. According to Osuna, they spoke for about 6 hours. Allegedly, DeFeo claimed that after a furious fight with his father, he and his sister planned to kill their parents, and that Dawn murdered the children to eliminate them as witnesses. He said that he was enraged on discovering his sister's actions, knocked her unconscious onto her bed, and shot her in the head. Police found traces of unburned gunpowder on Dawn's nightgown, which DeFeo proponents allege proves that she discharged the firearm. However, at trial, the ballistics expert Alfred Penna testified that unburned gunpowder is discharged through the muzzle of a weapon, indicating that she was in proximity to the muzzle of the weapon when it was discharged, and not that she fired the weapon. He reiterated this on A&E Amityville documentary that is extensively discussed in Will Saviv's Mentally Ill in Amityville. Saviv had an expert evaluate Pena's assessment, and the expert confirmed that he was correct. Moreover, the medical examiner found nothing to indicate that Dawn had been in a struggle. The bullet wound was the only fresh mark on her body. Skeptic Joe Nickel notes that given the frequency with which DeFeo has changed his story over the years, any new claims from him regarding the events that took place on the night of the murders should be approached with caution. Most of the claims made in Rick Osuna's book are sourced to DeFeo's ex-wife, Geraldine Gates. While in the 1986 interview with Newsday, she asserted she married DeFeo in 1974. In Osuna's book, she alleges that they married in 1970. Their 1993 divorce case says that they met in 1985, married in 1989, and divorced in 1993. Well, what the hell was it? My God. Anyway, Ronald DeFeo died at the age of 69 on March 12th of 2021 at the Albany Medical Center. The official cause of death has never been released to the public. All I remember about that case is that all of the members of the family were shot. They were face down in their beds. There were no noises heard by any of the neighbors. No neighbors heard any gunshots. No disturbances. Very, very strange circumstances. So, we're getting to the book. Jay Anson's book, The Amityville Horror, was published on September 13th of 1977. The book is based on the 28-day period during December 1975 and January 1976, when George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 children became the first family to live at 112 Ocean Avenue since the murders. The Lutz family left the house claiming that they had been terrorized by paranormal phenomena while living there. The book's 1979 film adaptation became the highest-grossing independent film of all time and held that record until 1990. It was followed by several sequels as well as many other films which share no connection at all other than the reference to Amityville. Clearly, he was either insane or on drugs or both. Who the hell knows? But very strange circumstances, surrounding that. I don't remember if they get to any of that in the book, The Amityville Horror. I have not read this book since I was a teenager. this. And this doesn't seem like the kind of reading material she would have. Sorry guys, my nose is super itchy. Does anybody else have terrible allergies this time of year? Anyway, your girl is struggling today. I will be reading 3 chapters of the book this evening, and then we will continue on, probably 3 chapters at a time from here on out. Alright, folks. Here's our prologue. On February 5th, 1976, the 10 o'clock news on New York's Channel 5 announced it was doing a series on people who claimed to have extrasensory powers. The program cut to reporter Steve Bauman investigating an allegedly haunted house in Amityville, Long Island. Bauman said that on November 13th of 1974, a large colonial house at 112 Ocean Avenue had been the scene of a mass murder. The book states that Ronald DeFeo was 24 at the time of this murder, but he was 23. Anyway, 24-year-old Ronald DeFeo had taken a high-powered rifle and methodically shot to death his parents, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters. DeFeo had subsequently been sentenced to life imprisonment. 2 months ago, the report continued, the house sold for $80,000 to a couple named George and Kathleen Lutz. The Lutzes had been aware of the killings, but not being superstitious, they had felt the house would be perfect for themselves and their 3 children. They moved in on December 18th. Shortly thereafter, Bauman said they had become aware that the place was inhabited by some psychic force and that they feared for their lives. They talked of feeling the presence of some energy inside, some unnatural evil that grew stronger each day that they remained. 4 weeks after they moved in, the Lutzes abandoned the house, taking only a few changes of clothes. At present, they were staying with friends in an undisclosed location. But before they left, Channel 5 stated their predicament had become known in the area. They had consulted the police and local priest as well as a psychic research group. They reportedly told of strange voices seeming to come from within themselves, of a power which actually lifted Mrs. Lutz off her feet toward a closet behind which was a room not noted on any of the home's blueprints. Reporter Steve Bauman had heard of their claims. After doing some background research on the house, he discovered that tragedy had struck nearly every family inhabiting the place, as well as an earlier house built on the same site. The Channel 5 announcer went on to say that William Weber, the attorney representing Ronald DeFeo, had commissioned studies hoping to prove that some force influenced the behavior of anyone living at 112 Ocean Avenue. Weber claimed this force may be of natural origin and felt it might be the evidence he needed to win his client a new trial. On camera, Weber said he was aware that certain houses could be built or constructed in a certain manner so as to create some sort of electrical currents through some rooms based on the physical structures of the house. three-story affair with dark shingles and white trim. The lot on which it stands is 50 by 237. The 50 feet across the street, the entrance door is down the right bulkhead that stands against the Amityville River. On a lamppost at the end of the paved driveway is a small sign bearing the name given the house by the previous owners. It reads, High Hopes. An enclosed porch with a wet bar looks out at a preferred older residential community of other big homes. Evergreens grow around the narrow grounds, partly blocking off the neighbors on either side, but their drawn shades can be seen easily enough. He looked around. George thought this was peculiar. He noticed the neighbors' shades were all drawn on the sides that faced his house, but not in front or in the direction of the houses on the other side. The house had been on the market for almost a year. It was not in the paper, but was fully described in Edith Evans' agency listing. Exclusive Amityville area, 6-bedroom Dutch colonial, spacious living room, formal dining room, enclosed porch, 3.5 baths, finished basement, 2-car garage, heated swimming pool, and large boathouse. Asking $80,000. $80,000 for a house described like that in the listing. It would have to be falling apart, or the typist could have left out a 1 before the 8. One might think she'd want to show a suspect bargain after dark and from the outside only, but she was glad to show them inside. The Lutz's examination was pleasant, swift, but thorough. Not only did it meet with their exact requirements and desires, but contrary to their anticipations, the house and other buildings on the property were in fine condition. Without hesitation, the broker then told the couple it was the DeFeo house. Everyone in the country, it seems, had heard about that tragedy. The 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo killing his father, mother, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters in their sleep on the night of November 13th, 1974. I'm just going to point out something that irks my ass. In the beginning of the book, it says Ronald DeFeo is 24 years old at the time of the murders, and now it's saying he's 23. Who the hell edited this book? Anyway, newspaper and television accounts had told of the police discovering the 6 bodies, all shot by a high-powered rifle. All, as the Lutzes learned months later, were lying in the same position, on their stomachs, with their heads resting on their arms. Confronted with this massacre, Ronald had finally confessed, "It just started. It went so fast, I just couldn't stop." During his trial, his court-appointed attorney, William Weber, pleaded for his insanity. For months before the incident, the young man testified, "I heard voices. Whenever I looked around, there was no one there, so it must have been God talking to me." Ronald DeFeo was convicted of murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms. I wonder if I should have told you which house this was before or after you saw it, the broker mused. I'd like to know for my future reference with clients looking for a house in the $90,000 range. Clearly, she didn't feel the Lutzes would be interested master bedroom. There would also be a sewing room and a big dressing room for George and Kathy on the same floor. Chris, Danny, and Missy were well pleased with their room assignments. Downstairs on the main floor, the Lutzes had a slight problem. They didn't own any dining room furniture. They finally decided that before the closing, George would tell the broker they'd like to purchase the dining room set left in storage by the DeFeos, along with a girl's bedroom set for Missy, a TV chair, and Ronald DeFeo's bedroom furniture. These things and other furnishings left in the house, like the DeFeo's bed, were not included in the purchase price. George paid out an additional $400 for these items. He also got for free 7 air conditioners, 2 washers, 2 dryers, a new refrigerator, and a freezer. Can you guys imagine getting all that stuff for $400? I can't go to the grocery store and get more than 3 bags for $400. There was a lot to be accomplished before moving day. In addition to the physical move, all of their belongings, there were complicated legal questions relative to the transfer of the title that required sifting and sorting out. The title to the house and property was recorded in the names of Ronald DeFeo's parents. It seemed Ronald, as the sole survivor, was entitled to inherit his parents' estate regardless of the fact that he had been convicted of murdering them. None of the assets in the estate could be disposed of before being legally settled in probate court. It was a difficult legal maze that the executors had to travel, and more time was still needed to provide the proper legal administration of any transactions related to the house or property. The Lutzes were advised that provisions could be devised to protect the legal interests of all concerned if the sale of the house was consummated, but to arrive at the proper procedure to accomplish this could take weeks or longer. Eventually, it was resolved that for the closing of $40,000 was to be put in escrow for the mortgage until the legal deed could be completed and executed. The closing date was set for the morning George and Kathy planned to move from Deer Park. They had arranged to close on the sale of their old house the day before. Confident that everything would be worked out and probably influenced by their anxiety to get settled in their new home, the couple decided to try and get everything done on the same day. Packing was to be mainly Kathy's job. To keep the children out of her hair and away from George, she assigned them minor projects. They would gather their own toys and arrange their clothes for packing. When the chores were completed, they were to start cleaning their rooms to make their old house presentable for the scrutiny of the new owners. George planned to close his office in Syosset, I probably butchered that too, and move it into the new house to save on the rent money. He had included this item in his original estimate of how he and Kathy could afford an $80,000 house. Now he figured that the basement, a well-finished layout, might be the best place. Moving his equipment and furnishings would be time-consuming enough, and if the basement was to be the location of the new office, some carpentry would be needed. The 45 by 22-foot boathouse out behind the home and garage was not there just to be ostentatious and an unused decoration for the Lutzes. closing was all over a few minutes past noon. As they rushed from the office, their lawyers assured them they would have no problem and eventually would get proper ownership papers. At 1 o'clock, George rolled into the driveway of 112 Ocean Avenue, with the trailer crowded with their belongings, and the DeFeo's refrigerator, washer, dryer, and freezer that had been in storage. Kathy followed with the children in the family van, with their motorcycle in the back. 5 of George's friends, young men in their 20s, and husky enough to help move bulky items, were waiting. Furniture boxes, crates, barrels, bags, toys, bikes, motorcycles, and clothing were taken from the truck onto the patio at the rear of the house and into the garage. Then George walked to the front door, fumbling in his pockets as he went, searching for the key to the door. Irritated, he returned to the truck and thoroughly searched it before admitting to his assistants that he didn't have it. The broker was the only one with the key, and she had taken it with her as she left the closing. George called her, and she went back to her office to fetch it. When the side door was finally open, the 3 children leaped from the van, made right for their respective toys, and began a parade of unprofessional movers in and out of the house. Kathy designated the destination of each parcel. It took time to maneuver furniture up the fairly narrow stairwell leading to the second and third floors, and by the time Father Mancuso arrived to bless the house, it was well after 1:30 p.m. December 18th. Father Frank Mancuso is not only a cleric. In addition to properly attending to his priestly duties, he handles clients in family counseling for his diocese. That morning, Father Mancuso had woken up feeling uneasy. Something was bothering him. He couldn't put his finger on it because he really didn't have any particular worries. In his own words, looking back, he can only explain it as a bad feeling. All that morning, the priest moved around his apartment in the Long Island rectory in a daze. Today is Thursday, he thought to himself. I've got a lunch date in Lindenhurst. Then I must go and bless the Lutz's new home and be at my mother's for dinner. Father Mancuso had met George Lee Lutz 2 years earlier. Even though George was a Methodist, he had helped Kathy and George in the days before they were married. The 3 children were Kathy's from a previous marriage, and as a priest to Catholic children, Father Mancuso felt a personal need to look after their interests. The young couple had often asked the friendly cleric with the neatly trimmed beard to come for lunch or dinner at their home in Deer Park. Somehow that anticipated meeting had never come off. Now George had a very special reason to invite him anew. Would he come to Amityville to bless their new house? Father Mancuso said he'd be there on December 18th. On the same day, he agreed to come to George's house. He also made a date to a lunch, with 4 old friends in Lindenhurst, Long Island. His very first parish had been there. Now he was very well regarded in the diocese, with his own quarters at the rectory in Long Island. Understandably, he busy and held to a hectic schedule, so he could not be blamed for trying to kill two birds with one stone, since Lindenhurst and Amityville were but a few miles apart. The cleric could not shake the bad feeling that persisted even through the pleasant lunch with his four old acquaintances. However, my candle just did something weird, didn't it? I don't know. However, he kept stalling, leaving for Amityville, pushing ahead of the time to go. His friends asked him where he was off to. To Amityville. Where in Amityville? It's a young couple in their 30s with 3 children. They live on, Father Mancuso referred to a slip of paper, 112 Ocean Avenue. That's the DeFeo house, one of his friends said. No, their name is Lutz, George and Kathleen Lutz. Don't you remember the DeFeos, Frank? Asked one of the men at the table. Last year, the son killed his whole family, his father, mother, and 4 brothers and sisters. Terrible, terrible thing. It was a big story in all the papers. The priest tried to think back. He seldom read the news when he picked up a paper, only looking for items of special interest. No, I really don't seem to recall it. Of the 4 men at the table, 3 were priests, and they somehow didn't like the idea. The consensus was that he shouldn't go. I promised them I'd come. As Father Mancuso drove the few miles to Amityville, he felt apprehensive. It wasn't the fact that he would be visiting the DeFeo house, he was sure, but something else. It was past 1:30 when he arrived. The Lutz's driveway was so cluttered that he had to park his old tan Ford on the street. It was an enormous house, he noted. Good for Kathy and the children that her husband had been able to provide such a fine home. The priest removed his clerical articles from the car, put on his stole, took the holy water, and entered the house to begin his ritual of blessing. When he flicked the first holy water and uttered the words that accompany the gesture, Father Mancuso heard a masculine voice say with a terrible clarity, "Get out!" He looked up in shock and whirled around. His eyes widened in astonishment. The command had come from directly behind him, but he was alone in the room. Who or whatever had spoken was nowhere to be seen. When he finished his ritual of blessing, the priest didn't mention the incident to the Lutzes. They thanked him for his kindness, asked him to stay for supper, such as it would be the first night. He politely refused, explaining that he planned to have dinner with his mother at her house in Nassau. She would be waiting for him. It was getting late, and he still had a bit of a drive. Kathy really wanted to thank Father Mancuso for his contribution to the occasion. George asked if he would accept a gift of money or a bottle of Canadian Club, but he quickly refused, stating he couldn't accept gratuities from a friend. Once in his car, Father Mancuso rolled down his window. diagnosis, but Father Mancuso was convinced of his own stability. His mother greeted him at her door, then frowned. "What's the matter with you, Frank? Don't you feel well?" The priest shook his head. "No, not too terribly." "Go in the bathroom and look at your face." Looking at his reflection in the mirror, he saw 2 large black circles under his eyes. They were so dark he thought they must be smears of dirt. He tried to wash them off with soap and water, but it didn't help. Back in Amityville, George took Harry to the dog compound next to the garage and chained him with a 20-foot steel lead. Now that it was after 6, George was almost exhausted and decided to leave the rest of his possessions in the truck, even though it was costing him $50 a day to rent the vehicle. as exciting.